When the clash of swords finally fell silent and the screams of men faded into the distance, the Roman battlefield did not resemble victory, it resembled the apocalypse. The ground was littered with corpses, sometimes hundreds, sometimes tens of thousands. Blood seeped into the soil, arrows and broken spears protruded like jagged spikes, and shattered shields lay scattered among lifeless hands. Horses collapsed in twisted heaps, their armor still clattering faintly in the wind. To an outsider, it looked like chaos had triumphed. But to Rome, this horror was only the beginning of another process. Because for the Romans, war did not end when the enemy fell. Death itself had to be conquered, controlled, and put into order. The Romans were unique among ancient powers in how they treated the battlefield. They did not simply walk away from the carnage and leave it to nature. They turned the aftermath of slaughter into a ritual, a system, a science. Their first priority was not feasting, celebration, or plunder. Their first priority was the living. Special squads of soldiers were trained to move through the carnage, scanning for the faintest sign of life. A whisper of breath, a flicker of movement, the weak cry of a wounded man. Imagine the silence broken only by groans as these patrols stepped carefully among piles of corpses, lifting bodies to check for warmth or pulse. If a soldier still clung to life, he was rushed to care. Roman military doctors, the Medici Militares, operated with brutal efficiency. Minor wounds were patched up on the spot with bandages, vinegar, or cauterization. The severely wounded were carried to mobile field hospitals called valetudinaria. These weren't luxurious places, they were tents hastily erected behind the front lines, but they represented Rome's commitment to recycling manpower. A soldier was not just a man. He was a weapon, an investment of training and money. To save him was not charity, it was strategy. Every recovered legionary meant one less recruit to train and one more fighter ready for the next campaign. Humanity and cold practicality walked hand in hand. While the medics fought their own battle to preserve life, another grim task began: counting the dead. Rome did not accept vagueness. There was no many lost, or some fallen. There were lists, names and numbers. Centurions, alongside appointed record keepers, walked through the battlefield carefully, identifying their men. Every Roman legionary carried a signaculum, a small lead disc stamped with his name, his cohort, and his city of origin. With these primitive dog tags, commanders updated their rosters with precision. This served two purposes. It ensured Rome always knew the strength of its legions, and it guaranteed that no Roman soldier simply vanished without a trace. To die forgotten was a fate worse than death itself. Families expected news of their sons, and Rome delivered it. In this way, the bureaucracy of empire reached even into the world of the dead. Once the living were treated and the dead counted, the Romans turned to the sacred duty of burial. In Roman belief, leaving a body unburied condemned the soul to wander restless. Even in the midst of war, the legions made time to dig mass graves, to lay bodies side by side, or when resources allowed, to build funeral pyres that turned flesh into ash and smoke. Burial was not just sanitation, it was religion. To deny the dead their rights was to offend the gods. Soldiers often pooled money into funeral clubs, the collegia funeratia, to guarantee that no comrade would be left to rot in the open. In return, each man swore to honor the burial of his brothers. Sometimes the grave was marked only by a rough stone. But for officers and respected veterans, tributes could be elaborate. The centurion Gaius Crastinus, who led a suicidal charge at Pharsalus, was commemorated by his men with a stone marker that still bore witness to his loyalty centuries later. In other cases, Rome immortalized its fallen with monuments, towering obelisks or stone reliefs, like the Tropaeum Traiani at Adamclisi, inscribed with the names of thousands, transforming their deaths into a monument of eternal victory. But alongside this religious duty was a practical concern. A battlefield covered in corpses was a hazard as dangerous as any enemy army. Rotting flesh attracted disease. The smell of decay demoralized the living. Villages nearby feared plague sweeping from fields soaked with blood. Rome, as always, responded with order. Military engineers, the architecti and fabri, swept in with ruthless efficiency. They cleared corpses, filled trenches, dismantled temporary fortifications, and poured quicklime over contaminated soil to disinfect it. They understood that war's filth could destroy morale faster than enemy blades. So they fought another kind of battle, against infection, against rot, against despair. And yet, Rome wasted nothing. After the corpses were removed, the scavenging began, not of flesh but of weapons. Every sword, shield, spear, and helmet was collected. Usable ones were cleaned and redistributed. Damaged weapons were sent to the forges to be melted down and reforged into new arms. Even the equipment of the enemy was seized, tested, and if worthy, absorbed into Rome's own arsenal. A well-forged Gallic sword or a sturdy Macedonian shield might end up in the hand of a Roman soldier in the next campaign. To let good steel rust on the field was an insult to Rome's hunger for power. Even in death, the enemy armed their conquerors. But there remained the most sensitive question of all: what to do with the bodies of the enemy. Here, Roman policy was both flexible and brutal. When the defeated were considered honorable foes, Carthaginians, Macedonians, or Gauls united under a leader, Rome sometimes permitted them burial. This could be done by their own surviving comrades or, at times, by the Romans themselves. But make no mistake, this was no gesture of kindness. It was theater. By burying their enemies, Rome projected itself as merciful, as great, as godlike in victory. It was propaganda in the soil, a performance designed to impress allies and terrify rivals. But when the enemy was seen as beneath respect, as slaves in revolt, rebel tribes, or so-called barbarians, the aftermath was merciless. Their corpses were left unburied, sprawled under the blazing sun, their flesh left to birds and beasts. This too was theater, but theater of terror. The sight of comrades rotting, their bones gnawed by animals, sent a message louder than words. Defy Rome and your body will be erased, your soul denied peace, your memory cursed. At times, this cruelty became spectacle. Leaders of rebellions were mutilated. Severed heads were paraded through camps, or sent to Rome to be displayed in the Forum, where citizens could gape at the ruined faces of once defiant kings and chieftains. The dead continued to serve Rome, as warnings, as trophies, as symbols of absolute dominance. Yet death did not stop soldiers from seeking their own reward. The battlefield was also a treasure field. Technically, plunder was controlled by officers, but in reality many soldiers saw the bodies as their rightful prize. They stripped rings from stiffened fingers, took coins from pouches and pulled cloaks from corpses. Gold, silver, armor, everything was fair game. A clever general could use this hunger strategically, allowing plunder to boost morale after a grueling campaign, or forbidding it to enforce strict discipline. But the balance was delicate. Livy records episodes where disputes over loot nearly tore legions apart. Greed, like rot, could destroy an army from within. Finally, once the bodies were buried or abandoned, once the weapons were collected, once the plunder was divided, the Romans turned to the gods. To them, war was never just blood and steel, it was sacred. After every battle came the lustratio, a purification ritual. Animals were sacrificed, prayers recited, and the army symbolically cleansed of the spiritual pollution of killing. Without this, Romans believed the stain of blood could infect not only soldiers but all of Rome itself. And for generals who returned victorious, the ultimate reward awaited: the triumph. It was not merely a parade, it was a festival of power. The victorious commander entered Rome in a chariot drawn by white horses, his face painted red to resemble Jupiter himself. Behind him marched his soldiers, displaying enemy banners, stolen treasures, prisoners in chains, and at times the heads or effigies of defeated leaders. The city erupted in awe. Rome celebrated not only the victory but the complete mastery of life and death. Behind the scenes, scribes documented everything. Numbers of fallen, names of heroes, quantities of weapons recovered, all inscribed on stone, on wax tablets, on monuments. Rome did not just conquer bodies. It conquered memory. It refused to allow death to dissolve into chaos. Even the aftermath of slaughter was catalogued, organized, preserved. Nothing escaped the machinery of empire. And so, when the last torch flickered out and the battlefield finally grew silent, Rome's work was not over. For the Romans, victory was never simply about defeating the enemy. It was about controlling what came after. The wounded became resources. The dead became records, symbols, and warnings. The battlefield itself became a quarry for steel, for loot, for propaganda. And even corpses, whether honored, buried, or left to rot, were absorbed into Rome's system of order. This was Rome's darkest secret, that victory was not only about killing men, but about mastering death itself.